The simple act. The night was cold, the kind of night where the wind carried a bite and made the street lamps flicker. Daniel walked slowly down the narrow street of his small town, his jacket pulled close around him. He carried a plastic box filled with leftovers from his dinner. It was not expensive food, just some rice, some bread, and a piece of chicken. But he knew there were others out here who would value it far more than he did. Daniel had always been a man who believed that kindness should not be loud. He never made speeches about compassion. He never tried to show off his good deeds. He simply acted, and tonight was no different. As he walked past the dark alley near the old shop, he stopped. The place smelled of damp bricks and garbage, but he could hear soft meows echoing from within. Stray cats lived here, and sometimes even a dog or two came by searching for scraps. Daniel bent down, placed the box on the ground, and gently slid it closer to the corner where he knew the animals would find it. He whispered softly, as if speaking to children. "Here you go, little ones. Stay warm tonight." The cats, cautious at first, crept forward with glowing eyes. That reflected the weak light. Within moments, they pounced on the food, fighting and eating with desperate hunger. Daniel smiled, not because it was anything grand, but because small kindnesses had always mattered to him. He straightened and turned to leave, his mind already thinking about getting back to his small apartment, maybe making tea before bed. But then something strange pricked at his senses. It was a feeling, not sound exactly, but the heavy weight of being watched. Daniel froze. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly he glanced over his shoulder. The cats hissed suddenly, their tails puffing up, their ears twisting toward the mouth of the alley. At first, Daniel thought it might be another dog, maybe a hungry, stray drawn by the smell of food, but the air felt different, colder, heavier, as if someone had stepped into the world from somewhere else. His heart thudded harder, the kind of sound you feel in your chest more than in your ears. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was only his imagination, but then he heard it, the faint sound of movement, light footsteps, too soft to belong to a man, too uncertain to belong to an animal. Daniel took one step forward, his body tense. He whispered again, almost to himself, "Who's there?" No answer came. Only silence, broken by the nervous rustle of the cats as they backed away from the food, their sharp eyes staring deeper into the alley. Daniel squinted, but the shadows were thick, wrapping the place in mystery. The flickering streetlight behind him made the darkness dance, creating shifting shapes that played tricks with his mind. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he saw it, movement, slow, deliberate. 3 tall shadows glided forward, their outlines strange, not shaped like men, not shaped like any animal Daniel had ever seen. His pulse quickened, his instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt rooted to the spot. Curiosity and fear chained him there. The figures stopped just at the edge of the light, and he could sense their hesitation, as though they feared stepping closer. Daniel licked his dry lips. His voice was low, trembling but steady enough. "Do you need help?" The shadows said nothing. They only shifted slightly, and in that tiny movement Daniel felt something powerful. Not menace, but weakness. Not strength, but hunger. It was as though the air itself carried the weight of their need. He took a careful step toward the box of food. The cats had scattered by now. Leaving scraps behind, Daniel pointed to it, unsure why he was even speaking. "There's food, if you need it." Silence answered him, but the 3 shadows moved. One leaned forward, almost falling before catching herself, her arms thin, her movement clumsy. Daniel's chest tightened. Whoever they were not here to fight. They were starving. For the first time, a strange thought entered his mind, a thought that made no sense but refused to leave. These were not strays, not humans, not anything that belonged to this quiet little town. His breath grew shallow. His skin prickled. His eyes widened as he realized that his small act of kindness for animals might have drawn something else out of the darkness, something from far beyond the earth. The air grew still. The street seemed to hold its breath. Daniel stood alone in the dim light. 3 shadows before him, the food between them, and the night around them heavy with silence. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not even know if he should take another step forward or run back home. But one thing was clear. The night had changed. His simple act was no longer simple, and whatever these beings were, they were waiting for him to decide. Strange shadows. Daniel stood frozen in the middle of the lonely street, the weak glow of the old street lamp spilling behind him, painting his figure long and thin across the cracked pavement. The box of food lay at the mouth of the alley, half-eaten scraps of rice, scattered across the ground. But Daniel's eyes were not on the food, nor on the cats that had hissed and fled into the night. His attention was locked on the figures that lingered just beyond the circle of light, 3 shadows stretched tall against the brick wall. There, outlines wavering as if the darkness itself was struggling to hold their shape. His breath came heavy. Every part of his body screamed for him to run, yet his feet held him where he was, his mind torn between the human instinct for survival and the strange pull of curiosity that chained him to the spot. The first figure shifted. Slightly, her movement fragile, almost trembling, as though even standing upright was a burden. The second stood still, her arms pressed close against her body, her shadow long but narrow. The third leaned forward, her head tilted like a child trying to study something new. Daniel blinked, his heart beating against his ribs like a drum. He could see now that these shapes were not tricks of the flickering lamp. They were real. 3 living beings standing in silence, studying him with eyes he could not yet see. The silence pressed down on Daniel, thick and heavy. Every small sound around him became sharper, the hum of the flickering light above, the distant barking of a dog, even the faint rustle of leaves carried on the cold wind. Everything sounded louder because the figures themselves made no noise. They simply stood there, waiting, as though they expected him to make the first move. Daniel felt his throat dry, his lips cracked. He tried to speak, but his voice trembled. "Who are you?" His words echoed softly, swallowed quickly by the night. No reply came, only the faint sound of breathing, shallow and uneven. Something about their silence unnerved him more than if they had shouted, more than if they had advanced with anger. It was the silence of beings who were not sure how to speak, or perhaps not allowed to speak. Daniel squinted, trying to make sense of their outlines, trying to convince himself they were only tall women lost in the night. But deep down he knew that was a lie. Their movements were too strange, their stillness too unnatural, their presence too heavy for ordinary humans. He rubbed his hands together, trying to keep warm, but his body trembled not from the cold, but from the rising tide of fear. Then it happened. One of the figures stepped forward, the sound of her foot scraping the ground sharp in the still air. Daniel's chest tightened. He stumbled 1 step back, his hand instinctively reaching for the old pocket knife he carried, though he knew it would do nothing. The figure stopped, at the very edge of the light, and for the first time he saw her face, pale and thin, her cheeks hollow as if carved by hunger, her eyes faintly glowing, not like fire, but like dying embers. Soft and sad, Daniel's heart twisted. This was not a monster, this was a starving girl. Not human, but not beast either. Something fragile and desperate. The second and third figures followed, stepping into the light with hesitant movements, each of them carrying the same look, fragile bodies, glowing eyes, hunger written across every feature of their faces. Daniel's breath caught as he realized what they were looking at. Their eyes were not fixed on him. They were fixed on the scraps of food scattered across the ground. The cats had left pieces behind, and the alien girls stared at those scraps the way a child stares at bread after days of starvation. Their lips parted slightly, their thin throats moving as if swallowing down the pain of emptiness. Daniel felt his fear shift. It did not vanish, but it changed shape, turning into something else, into the heavy ache of pity, into the question that clawed at his mind. What could drive these beings to such desperation that they would creep silently into a human town at night, risking discovery? Just for scraps left behind for strays, his mind raced with impossible questions. Who were they? Where had they come from? Why had they chosen this place? Yet the most important question was simpler, clearer, staring him in the face. Should he help them, or should he walk away? The first girl took another step, her bare feet. Scraping against the rough ground, Daniel flinched but did not move back this time. He realized she was not approaching him. She was approaching the food, slowly, painfully, as though every step cost her strength she did not have. She crouched low, her trembling hand reaching for a small piece of bread, but she paused halfway, her glowing eyes flicking toward Daniel, with a look he could not understand. It was not the look of a thief, not the look of an enemy. It was the look of someone asking for permission. Daniel's chest tightened, his throat closed. His voice was faint but steady enough. "It's yours. Take it." The girl's hand shook, but she grabbed the bread and quickly tore a piece into her mouth, chewing hungrily. The other two followed, kneeling down, their weak bodies shaking as they grabbed whatever scraps were left. Daniel could only watch, his heart heavy with both fear and compassion. The way they ate was not the way of proud warriors or dangerous invaders. It was the way of survivors, desperate children lost far from home. The silence was broken only by the sound of their hurried eating. Every bite filled the night with echoes. Of desperation, Daniel stood motionless, his mind torn apart by the reality before him. He had come only to feed stray animals, yet now he stood feeding beings from another world. Fragile, alien girls who looked as though life itself had been cruel to them. The thought struck him hard. His small act of kindness had pulled open a door he had never meant to touch, and behind that door was a truth that frightened and fascinated him at the same time. When the last crumb was gone, the three girls looked up at him together, their glowing eyes soft, filled with something unspoken, a silent plea, a question he did not yet understand. Daniel felt a shiver crawl down his spine. He knew this was not the end. This was only the beginning, and somewhere deep inside, he sensed that tonight would change his life forever. The hungry truth. The night stretched heavier as Daniel stood at the edge of the alley, his chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. He had fed stray animals countless times before, but never had the simple act of leaving food behind turned into something so strange and so terrifying, yet also so heartbreaking. Three alien girls crouched before him, their thin hands clutching scraps of rice and bread, eating with a hunger that shook Daniel to his very core, their faces pale and fragile, their hollow cheeks and trembling lips telling a story he did not yet know, a story of survival and suffering, far beyond what he could imagine. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but his tongue felt heavy, his throat dry, the silence between them louder than any words. The first girl raised her head slowly, her glowing eyes dull, not with anger, but with exhaustion. The light within them was not the sharp fire of warriors, it was the dim spark of beings struggling not to vanish. She chewed the last crumb of bread carefully, as if afraid to waste even a single bite. Daniel's chest tightened as he watched her. He realized she was younger than he thought. Not a woman, but barely more than a girl. The others, too, carried the same youth in their faces, though worn down by hardship. One of them wiped her lips with a trembling hand, glancing toward Daniel. With a look that pierced his heart, it was not a look of threat, not a look of demand. It was the silent cry of someone who had forgotten what kindness felt like. Daniel's mind raced, questions spinning faster than he could hold them. How long had they been here? Were they alone? Did others know about them? What world had they come from? But above all, one question roared louder than the rest. Why were they so hungry The evidence lay in their fragile bodies, in the way their thin bones pressed beneath their skin, in the way their stomachs clenched as though unused to even this small food. It was hunger not of one day or two, but of weeks, maybe months. Hunger that stripped dignity and left only the desperate will to survive. He swallowed hard, his hands tightening into fists. He wanted to speak but feared breaking the fragile moment. Finally, his voice slipped out, soft and low. You needed this food, didn't you?" The girls did not answer, but they did not need to. Their trembling movements were answer enough. The first girl lowered her gaze, shame shadowing her face as though being caught in such weakness was unbearable. Daniel stepped forward, kneeling slightly to meet their eyes. "It's all right, I understand. You're just hungry, aren't you?" His words were simple, but they carried weight, and the alien girls paused in their eating, glancing at him, as if struggling to believe those words were real. The second girl, the smallest, held a piece of rice in her palm, her hand shaking so much she nearly dropped it. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but only a broken sound escaped, a whisper carried by trembling lips. Daniel leaned closer, his heart thudding, but the sound was too faint, a word lost in the cold wind. Yet in that broken sound he felt the ache of longing, of emptiness, of fear that no one would understand. He wanted to reach out, but he stopped himself, unsure if touching them would break the fragile trust that had begun to form. The third girl, who had been the quietest, lifted her gaze slowly, her eyes glowing faintly blue in the weak streetlight. Her stare locked onto Daniel's face. There was something in her look that froze him in place, something heavy and unspoken, as though she was telling him without words that this hunger was not an accident, not a random twist of fate, but something caused by a greater cruelty. Daniel felt his stomach twist, a chill running down his spine. He realized then that their suffering carried a truth deeper than simple need, a truth that had dragged them across stars to end up here in a forgotten human alley. The silence between them grew heavier, but this silence was not empty. It was filled with meaning, with questions, with emotions unspoken. Daniel sat back on his heels, running a hand through his hair, his voice breaking the stillness again. "You don't want to hurt me, do you? You only wanted food." The girls did not move, but slowly, very slowly, the first one shook her head, a faint trembling movement that spoke louder than words. Daniel exhaled, relief rushing through him, yet also deeper worry because now he knew these were not threats, these were victims, and the truth of their hunger was only the beginning of something far greater. His thoughts raced back to the flicker of lights he had seen in the sky earlier, faint, distant, like stars moving where no stars should move. Was someone searching for these girls? Was someone hunting them? And if so, what kind of cruelty had driven them here starving, barefoot, desperate enough to steal food from stray animals? Daniel felt his heart grow heavy. He had thought of this night as just another act of kindness, but the truth was clearer now. His small kindness had collided with a story written far beyond his world, a story that carried danger, mystery, and perhaps hope. The girls finished the last of the scraps, their thin fingers brushing against the ground as if searching for more. But there was nothing left. Slowly, they sat back, their shoulders hunched, their glowing eyes fixed on Daniel once again, the weight of their stare pressing against him. He realized they were waiting, not for food alone, but for his decision, whether he would walk away and leave them to vanish in hunger, or whether he would step deeper into this unknown and carry the truth of their need with him. Daniel clenched his fists, his breath coming in long, uneven pulls. His life until now had been simple, quiet, ordinary. But tonight the universe had placed a choice before him, and the hungry truth in the eyes of these three alien girls would not allow him to remain ordinary any longer. The silent Plea Daniel stood there under the flickering streetlight, his chest still heavy from what he had just witnessed. The three alien girls had finished the scraps of food, their thin hands brushing against the dirty ground as if searching for more. But there was nothing left. Their bodies looked weak, their eyes still glowing faintly in the darkness. But the glow did not speak of strength. It spoke of fragility, of emptiness, of lives that had been starved far too long. Daniel felt his stomach knot tighter. He wanted to ask them questions, to demand answers about who they were and why they had come. But something inside him told him that now was not the time for questions. Now was the time for something else. The three girls looked at him together, not moving closer, not backing. Away, their gazes fixed on him with a weight that pressed into his chest. Daniel had seen people beg before. He had seen eyes filled with hunger, but this was different. These eyes carried shame, desperation, and something even deeper, something like hope that had almost died but had not yet fully disappeared. It was as though they were silently pleading with him, begging him not with words but with their trembling bodies and their glowing stares. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had not asked for this. He had not prepared for this. But now he was standing face to face with a choice that would define everything. The first girl lowered her head, her thin fingers clutching her stomach, her movements slow, almost fragile, as though even standing was a struggle. The second girl pressed her hands together tightly as if in prayer, her glowing eyes glancing up only for a moment before dropping again. The third girl stayed still, her gaze unbroken, her faint blue glow locking with Daniel's eyes in a way that sent chills down his spine. She did not blink, she did not look away, and in that stare, Daniel read a story without needing words. It was a story of wandering, of fear, of suffering, and of an unspoken question. Will you help us? Daniel shifted his weight, his hands trembling as he rubbed them together for warmth. The night air felt colder now, as though the universe itself held its breath waiting for his answer. His mind screamed at him to turn away, to walk back to the safety of his small apartment, to pretend this never happened. But his heart, heavy and restless, whispered something different. It whispered that leaving now would not just be walking away from three strangers. It would be walking away from something greater, something that had chosen him in this very moment. The silence stretched on, long and painful, broken only by the soft hum of the streetlight above and the distant call of a night bird. Daniel could not bear it anymore. His voice cracked the air, soft but steady. "You're asking me for more, aren't you? You want help?" He felt foolish saying it out loud, but the moment the words left his mouth, the first girl lifted her head, her glowing eyes filling with a shine that was not quite tears, but close. The second girl's lips parted as if to speak, but only a faint broken breath escaped, and the third girl, still unblinking, gave the smallest nod, so small that it might have been missed. But Daniel saw it, and that nod felt heavier than the weight of the entire night sky. His heart ached. These were not warriors, not invaders, not monsters. They were lost children of some distant world, begging for kindness in silence because their voices could not reach him. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands, his mind spinning. He thought of the box of leftovers, of the cats that had eaten before them, of his own belief that kindness should never be wasted. Now that same belief burned inside him, pushing him to act, even though every part of his rational mind screamed of danger. He crouched slowly, lowering himself so that he was closer to their level, careful not to move too fast, his eyes locked. With theirs, his voice trembling but filled with determination. "I don't know who you are. I don't know why you're here, but I can't leave you like this." The words left his mouth like a vow, and for a moment the air shifted, as though even the night itself acknowledged the promise he had made. The girls did not move, but Daniel could feel the change, the invisible bond tightening between them. The first girl covered her face with her hands, a sound escaping her throat, not quite a sob, not quite a word, but something in between. The second leaned against her sister, her thin shoulders shaking, and the third still held her unbroken stare. But now her glowing eyes softened, the hardness melting into something gentler, something Daniel could only call trust, fragile trust, but trust nonetheless. He felt the weight of it pressing on him, heavy but not crushing. It was a weight he chose to carry. Daniel stood slowly, glancing around the empty street, his heart beating faster as he realized the risk of being seen. If anyone else from the town walked past now and saw him crouched in the alley with 3 alien girls, there would be panic, there would be shouts, there would be fear. Yet he could not turn away. He could not break the silent plea that bound. Him to them, his voice low, he whispered to himself more than to them. "All right then, I'll find something more. But you have to stay hidden. Do you understand?" The girls did not answer, but the faint shift of their bodies, the way they leaned toward him ever so slightly, was answer enough. Daniel turned his face upward for a moment. Staring at the dark sky above, the stars seemed brighter tonight, but among them he remembered the strange faint lights moving earlier. He clenched his fists, knowing that whatever had driven these girls here might not be far behind. And yet, as he looked back at them, their frail figures pressed together for comfort, he knew he could not abandon them. Not now, not ever. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with promise, with trust, and with a bond that had begun in the simplest act of kindness, but had now grown into something much larger. And as the night deepened around them, Daniel understood. One thing with absolute certainty: the silent plea of these alien girls had reached his heart, and it had changed him forever. Sharing the meal, Daniel's mind would not settle. His heart hammered against his ribs as he stood in the half-lit street. The 3 alien girls crouched in silence, their frail figures huddled together like lost children who had forgotten the warmth of home. Their glowing eyes still carried the faint shimmer of hunger, their thin fingers twitching as though their bodies ached for more. Daniel felt a surge of conflict. His instincts screamed at him to walk away, to pretend none of this had ever happened. But the sight of their fragile forms chained him to the ground, and deep within, the echo of their silent plea pressed harder on his heart. He glanced down at the box that had once held food, now emptied by strays and by these strange visitors, and he realized that whatever kindness he had offered so far was not enough. The scraps had barely touched their hunger. They needed more, and they needed it soon. Daniel wiped his cold hands against his jacket and spoke softly, almost like a parent reassuring frightened children. "Wait here, don't move, I'll bring more." His words carried no authority, no command, but something deeper, something like a promise. He did not know if they understood him, but the way their glowing eyes followed his every word made him believe they did. He turned quickly, his boots striking the pavement as he hurried back toward his apartment. The streets were empty, but every shadow seemed alive. Every flicker of light seemed like an eye watching him. Daniel's thoughts twisted in circles. What if someone else saw them? What if the town discovered what he had discovered? What if those strange lights in the sky earlier were searching for them even now? The danger was real, but so was the bond he had already built, and he knew he could not abandon them to the cold night. Reaching his small apartment, Daniel rushed inside, his hands trembling as he pulled open cupboards and searched through the fridge. He found bread, a half-used carton of milk, some leftover soup in a pot, and a small pack of biscuits. It was not much, but it was more than the scraps he had left earlier. He stuffed them into a bag, his heart racing as he thought of the 3 starving girls waiting in silence. When he stepped back outside, the wind had grown sharper, cutting against his skin. The night felt heavier, but Daniel pressed forward, clutching the bag as if it carried more than food, as if it carried hope itself. When he returned to the alley, he slowed, his breath fogging in the air. For a terrifying moment he feared they had vanished, that they had fled into the night or been taken by some unseen hand. But then he saw them, still huddled together at the edge of the shadows, their glowing eyes fixed on him as though they had been waiting every second for his return. Daniel's chest loosened with relief. He stepped closer, crouching carefully, his voice low and calm. "I brought more. Here. It's yours." He opened the bag slowly, pulling out the bread first, then the soup, then the biscuits, laying them out carefully on the cracked ground. The first girl hesitated. Her hands trembling as she reached for the bread, she tore off a small piece, chewing slowly at first, then faster as the taste filled her mouth. The second girl leaned forward, taking a biscuit and holding it close to her lips before biting into it with desperate hunger. The third girl, who had always kept her strong gaze on Daniel, finally lowered her eyes to the food, scooping the soup carefully with her hands. Daniel felt a lump in his throat as he watched them. He realized they were trying to eat carefully, to restrain themselves, but their hunger broke through, and soon they devoured everything with the raw urgency of survival. Daniel sat quietly, watching every movement, his emotions torn between awe and sorrow. The way they ate reminded him of war documentaries he had seen, of children rescued from starvation camps. It was not the eating of those who lived normally. It was the devouring of those who feared every bite might be their last. He felt the ache of helplessness sink deeper into his chest. These were not monsters. These were not conquerors. These were survivors who had been abandoned to a fate worse than death. When the food was gone, the alley grew silent again. The three girls sat back, their glowing eyes softer now, less desperate but still filled with exhaustion. The smallest one let out a faint sigh, her body trembling as if the meal had given her strength, but reminded her of how weak she truly was. The second leaned against her shoulder, closing her eyes for a moment as though fighting off sleep, and the third slowly raised her gaze back to Daniel, the blue glow in her eyes stronger now, clearer, as if telling him silently that she recognized his choice, that she understood the risk he had taken by sharing what he had. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He realized suddenly that this simple sharing of a meal had bound him to them in a way he could not break. Kindness was not just a gift, it was a chain, and now that chain tied him to these three fragile lives. He thought of the strange lights he had seen earlier in the sky, the possibility of pursuit, the chance that danger was already on its way. But when he looked into their glowing eyes, he knew there was no turning back. The silence between them stretched once more, but this time it was different. It was not the silence of fear, it was the silence of trust, fragile and new, yet heavy with meaning. Daniel leaned back against the wall of the alley, his breath fogging. In the night air, his voice came out low, steady, almost like a vow. If you need food, I'll bring it. If you need safety, I'll try to protect you. The words shocked even him, but once spoken, he did not regret them. The alien girls did not reply with words, but their glowing eyes, soft and shining, told him everything. And as the wind swept through the alley, carrying with it the cold bite of the night, Daniel knew this meal was more than food. It was a bridge, a fragile bridge between two worlds, one of a simple human man and one of three alien girls who had known only hunger, and though he did not yet understand the full weight of what he had begun, he knew his life had already changed forever. The hidden danger. The alley was quiet after the meal. The three alien girls sat close to one another, their frail bodies pressed together as though the warmth of each other was the only thing keeping them whole. Daniel leaned back against the cold brick wall, his breath rising in faint clouds. He could feel the weight of the night pressing harder now, heavier than before. The food he had given them had brought a fragile peace, but peace never lasted long, not in moments like this, and somewhere deep inside he knew something was coming, something that would break this fragile stillness. The girls watched him with eyes that no longer carried only hunger. Their glowing stares now held something else, something like trust. And it terrified him more than their desperation had, because trust was heavier than hunger. Trust was a bond. That could not be broken without cost. Daniel rubbed his hands together slowly, his mind spinning. What if someone else had seen him? What if his neighbors or a passing stranger had noticed him slipping into the shadows and kneeling beside creatures that were not human? What story would spread? What fear would rise? Humans feared the unknown, and nothing was more unknown than 3 alien girls sitting in an alley. He wanted to believe the night would stay silent, that he could sneak them into his apartment or find a place for them to hide, but the memory of those faint lights in the sky gnawed at his thoughts. He had seen them earlier before entering the alley, faint like moving stars, unnatural in their rhythm, and now the thought returned sharper, heavier. What if those lights were not stars at all? What if they were ships, searching, scanning, hunting? His chest grew tight at the idea. His small town might already be under invisible eyes, and he was now part of something far greater than he could control. The air shifted, a low hum whispering through the cold wind. Daniel froze, his ears straining. The girls felt it too. He could tell by the way their bodies stiffened, their glowing eyes darting toward the sky with sudden fear. The hum grew louder, soft at first but rising like a pulse in the air. Daniel pushed himself off the wall, his heart thudding harder. He looked up past the flickering streetlight, his breath catching in his throat. There it was, a faint glow moving behind the clouds, too low, too deliberate to be a plane. The light pulsed, as though alive, scanning, searching. The first girl whimpered softly, her thin hand clutching the sleeve of her sister. The second pressed herself lower against the wall, her trembling body folding inward. The third girl remained upright, but her glowing eyes darkened, her lips pressed. Tight, as though she already knew what this meant, Daniel's mind raced, fear clawing at him. He whispered harshly, "Are they looking for you?" His voice cracked the silence, but none of the girls spoke. Their silence was answer enough. He clenched his fists, realization burning through him. Whoever these beings were, whatever world they had come from, they were not safe here, and someone was searching for them. The hum grew stronger, vibrating faintly in the ground beneath Daniel's boots. The streetlight flickered harder, casting wild shadows across the walls. Daniel's body screamed at him to run, to hide, but his eyes fell back on the 3 fragile figures pressed against the wall, and he knew he could not now, not after he had shared his food, not after he had promised with his heart that he would not abandon them. The first girl's glowing eyes lifted toward him, filled with fear, but also with that same unspoken trust, the trust that told him they had no one else. He crouched quickly, his voice low but urgent. "You can't stay here. It's not safe. Come with me." His words trembled, but they carried the weight of desperation. The girls looked at him uncertainly, fear flickering in their eyes, yet their bodies leaned forward as though drawn to his certainty. The third girl placed her thin hand on the ground, pushing herself up slowly, her movements heavy but determined. The other 2 followed, their small frames swaying with weakness but holding on to the fragile strength that hunger and fear had left them. Daniel led them carefully out of the alley, his steps quick but quiet, his ears straining against the hum above. The glow in the clouds followed, shifting slowly. Daniel's chest pounded. Every instinct told him that the eyes above would find him, that the strangers searching would tear the girls away. But still he pushed forward, guiding them through the empty streets toward his apartment. The night felt endless. Every shadow stretched too far. Every corner seemed to hold hidden eyes. Yet he did not stop. When they reached the side of his building, Daniel pressed them close against the wall, his breath fast and uneven. He looked up again. The glow in the clouds dimmed for a moment, then moved further away. The hum softened, not gone, but shifting. Daniel exhaled slowly. His heart still racing, he turned back to the girls, their glowing eyes staring at him with silent questions. He shook his head, whispering, "I don't know who they are. I don't know what they want, but I think they want you, and I won't let them take you." The girls remained silent, but the third one, the one with the strongest gaze, lifted her hand and touched her chest, then pointed faintly toward Daniel. It was a gesture so small, yet so heavy, a gesture of connection, of gratitude, of trust. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He nodded once, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll face it together. The words spilled out before he could stop them, and as the night stretched around them, he knew this was no longer about a simple act of kindness. This was about survival, about trust, and about danger far greater than he had ever known. The choice. The cold night pressed down on Daniel as though the air itself carried the weight of the decision he had to make. The hum of the strange lights in the clouds still echoed faintly, fading but not gone, and the memory of their shifting glow haunted his thoughts. The three alien girls stood close beside him, their frail bodies huddled together like frightened birds clinging to each other for strength, their glowing eyes fixed on him with an intensity that stole his breath. It was in that moment Daniel realized that whatever choice he made now would not only decide their fate, but also his own. He leaned against the wall of his small apartment building, his mind torn, into two voices that fought like fire and water. One voice screamed at him to walk away, to pretend none of this had happened, to leave the girls hidden in the shadows of the night and return to his life of quiet normalcy. That voice whispered of safety, of comfort, of the fragile peace he had known before this night. But the other voice, the louder one, burned in his chest like a flame. It whispered of kindness, of promises already made, of glowing eyes that carried silent trust, and Daniel knew deep down that he could not walk away. The first girl swayed slightly, her weak legs trembling as though the little strength she had gained from food was already fading. Daniel caught her instinctively, his hands steadying her thin shoulders. The contact was brief but powerful. She looked up at him, her glowing eyes soft with a mix of fear and gratitude. The second girl clutched his sleeve as though afraid he might vanish, her frail fingers pressing into the fabric. The third girl, the one who always held her gaze steady, stepped forward, her thin hand reaching out, not to beg, not to cling, but to offer something. She pressed her palm gently against her chest, then extended it toward him, the silent gesture as clear as spoken words. She was asking him to choose. Daniel's throat tightened, his heart pounded. He thought of the life he had lived until now. Small, simple, quiet, marked only by small acts of kindness to stray animals and forgotten souls. And then he thought of what stood before him. Three beings from beyond the stars, lost, starving, hunted, yet still alive, still holding on to the fragile thread of hope. He wondered how many others had passed them by, how many doors had closed, how many hearts had turned cold. And now, here he was, one ordinary man with no power, no weapons, no plan, and yet he was the one standing at this crossroad. The hum in the sky rose again faintly, a reminder that time was running short. Daniel clenched his fists. The decision tore through him. But when his eyes met theirs, he already knew his answer. He could not abandon them. He could not betray the silent plea that had chained itself to his heart. His voice was low but firm, carrying a strength he did not know he had. "I'll protect you, no matter what comes. You're not alone anymore." The words slipped into the night like a vow, unshakable and binding. The first girl lowered her head, her shoulders trembling, not from weakness this time, but from something closer to relief. The second let out a faint sound, a broken whisper like a sob, her glowing eyes shining brighter. The third kept her steady gaze on him, and for the first time her lips parted into the smallest, faintest curve. Not a full smile, but something close, something fragile and rare. Daniel felt his chest tighten. It was not only trust he saw in their eyes now, it was belonging. It was hope. Daniel quickly ushered them toward the back of the building, his steps fast and careful, his ears straining. For any hint of pursuit, he guided them through the narrow stairwell and into his small apartment. The familiar walls felt different now, heavier, alive with the presence of something otherworldly. He closed the door softly behind them, locking it. Even though he knew a simple lock could not keep away what hunted from the sky. The girls stepped cautiously inside, their glowing eyes scanning. The room, touching the simple furniture, the faint warmth of the heater, the small pile of blankets on the couch. They settled together in a corner, huddled close, their frail bodies finally resting. Daniel stood over them for a long moment. His mind restless, fear still clawed at him. He knew the danger had not ended. He knew the glow in the sky might return at any moment. But as he watched them, fragile yet alive, something stronger than fear settled in his chest. It was resolve he had chosen, and now he would not break that choice. The night dragged on. Silence filling the room, except for the faint breathing of the girls and the distant hum of the world outside. Daniel sat in his chair, his eyes heavy but his mind sharp, his heart steady. He thought of what tomorrow would bring. He thought of the danger above, he thought of the promise he had spoken into the cold night, and he knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he also knew he would not walk it alone. As dawn began to stretch faint light through the curtains, Daniel looked at the 3 alien girls curled together on the floor, their glowing eyes finally dimmed in sleep. Their fragile faces softened. For the first time since he had met them, they looked at peace. He exhaled slowly, his body still tense but his spirit lighter. He had made his choice, and no matter what the universe demanded of him, no matter what dangers came from the sky, he would stand by it, because sometimes a single act of kindness could change everything, and sometimes the smallest choice could echo across the stars.